Hello and welcome to Oak Island Theories. In this series, we're going to explore some of the most fascinating hypotheses regarding the nature of the Oak Island treasure and the identities of those who buried it. Ever since the discovery of the money pit in 1795, armchair historians have puzzled over the Oak Island mystery. What lies beneath the surface of the haunted isle in the North Atlantic? Who are the men that buried it? And why did they go to such great lengths to keep it hidden? Questions like these have given rise to all manner of intriguing supposition. In this video, we'll take a look at what is perhaps the most romantic of all the Oak Island theories: the notion that a priceless religious artifact lies at the bottom of the money pit, and that the men who buried it were members of a medieval military order known as the Knights Templar.
The story of the Knights Templar begins in the 12th century AD, in the wake of the First Crusade. 23 years before the order's founding, 60,000 Christian knights and peasant soldiers left Europe for the Holy Land, determined to wrest Jerusalem from Islamic control. These crusaders laid siege to the Holy City in the year 1099 and captured it within 9 days, effectively ending the rule of the Seljuk Sultanate in Palestine. Following the Christian conquest of the Holy Land, pilgrims from all over Christendom flocked to Jerusalem. Bandits took advantage of this situation and began looting and killing Christian devotees on their way to the Holy City. In an effort to keep the pilgrim route safe, a group of monks who ran a hospital in Jerusalem hired European knights and Turkish mercenaries to escort pilgrims to and from the Holy Land, founding a new type of monastic military order called the Knights Hospitaller. 20 years later, a poor French knight named Hugues de Payan, following the example of the Hospitallers, gathered together 8 knightly companions and formed a similar order. The knights took monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and resolved to protect pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem. They called themselves the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Jesus Christ. De Payan and his companions traveled to Jerusalem and sought the blessings of the reigning Crusader king, Baldwin II. The monarch granted the Poor Fellow Soldiers permission to take up residence on a sacred site called the Temple Mount. According to Jewish sacred scripture, the Temple Mount was the place where Abraham, the patriarch of the Jewish people, had prepared an altar on which to sacrifice his son Isaac. Millennia later, the wise and wealthy King Solomon, the third king of Israel, built a magnificent temple atop this holy site. The inner sanctuary of Solomon's temple, called the Holy of Holies, housed the Israelites' most sacred treasures, foremost among them the Ark of the Covenant. The Temple of Solomon was destroyed by the army of Nebuchadnezzar II, king of Babylon, in the year 587 BC. It was replaced by a second temple, which was plundered and razed by the Romans in 70 AD. By the time the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Jesus Christ arrived in Jerusalem, the Temple Mount was dominated by 2 Islamic houses of worship, the iconic Dome of the Rock and the smaller Al-Aqsa Mosque. The knights were granted permission to headquarter themselves in the latter. Pleased with their new abode, the Poor Fellow Soldiers renamed themselves the Knights Templar, in honor of the legendary synagogue atop the ruins of which they slept. The Knights Templar grew rapidly in the decade following their founding. They made a name for themselves in Europe, were officially endorsed as a charity by the church, and received a flood of donations and new recruits. In the late 1120s, Turkish armies recaptured the cities of Aleppo and Edessa in present-day Syria and Turkey. Prominent clergymen began to push for a second Christian offensive in the Holy Land, and by 1147, the Second Crusade was underway. The Knights Templar earned a ferocious reputation as a fighting force during this holy war, proving themselves to be some of the most disciplined troops since the legionaries of the Roman Empire. Highly trained, heavily armored, and mounted on huge war horses, these monastic knights would smash into enemy lines at full gallop, often being employed as shock troops against jihadi forces. The Knights Templar wore white surcoats emblazoned with red crosses, symbolizing their call to martyrdom. Indeed, one rule of engagement they famously abided by was to never retreat from or surrender during battle. Although the Knights Templar were initially established to serve a martial purpose, they soon outgrew their original function. Using castles that had been donated to them, they established the world's first banks. Pilgrims who wished to travel to the Holy Land would entrust the Templars with their wealth. The Templars, in turn, would safeguard their clients' wealth until their return, giving the pilgrims letters of credit which they could exchange for coinage at other Templar strongholds on the road to Jerusalem. In time, the poor fellow soldiers of Jesus Christ were extraordinarily wealthy, although individual members were forbidden from personally owning any of the order's riches. Legend has it that the treasures acquired by the Knights Templar consisted of more than just gold and silver. Some believe that, during the Crusades, the Templars came into the possession of priceless religious artifacts, including, perhaps, the Ark of the Covenant, the chest containing the Ten Commandments, the menorah, the lampstand of pure gold used to illuminate the Holy of Holies in Solomon's Temple, the lance of Longinus, the Roman spear used to pierce the side of the crucified Christ, and the Holy Grail, the chalice from which Jesus and his apostles drank at the Last Supper, which Joseph of Arimathea used to collect Christ's blood following the crucifixion. In the summer of 1187 AD, Crusader armies clashed with a large force of Egyptian Saracens commanded by a sultan named Salah ad-Din. The Saracens drew the Crusader army onto an arid plateau near two hills called the Horns of Hattin, cutting them off from natural water sources. When the Crusaders were overwhelmed by thirst, the Muslim army attacked and destroyed them, administering one of the most crushing defeats the Christian armies ever suffered during the Crusades. In the aftermath of this decisive Islamic victory, Salah ad-Din's army swept through the Holy Land and captured a number of Crusader cities, including Jerusalem, where the Knights Templar were headquartered. This Islamic conquest sparked the Third Crusade, in which armies from France and England retook a number of Palestinian cities. At the end of this offensive, Jerusalem remained in Muslim hands, and so the Knights Templar established their new headquarters in the freshly recaptured city of Acre, situated north of Jerusalem on the Mediterranean coast. In 1291, an army of Egyptian Mamelukes, or slave soldiers, besieged Acre, capturing all of the city, save for the Templars' fortress. The Mameluke Sultan agreed to allow the remaining Templars safe passage to the nearby island of Cyprus, and sent in a force to oversee the evacuation. The Mamelukes charged with this task were promptly massacred by the Templars. That night, the Templar commander, along with a handful of hand-picked knights, fled to the docks by way of a secret underground tunnel, some say with the fabled Templar Treasure. Legend has it that these knights shipped the treasure to Cyprus, where the Knights Templar would later establish its new headquarters. The following morning, the captain of the Templar fortress, along with a small guard, rode into the Mameluke camp to discuss terms. The captain and his men were immediately executed in retaliation for the massacre perpetrated the night before. The remaining Templar knights and men-at-arms put up a last stand, which culminated in the destruction of the Templar fortress and the slaughter of every last Templar soldier garrisoned at Acre. The fall of Acre sounded the death knell of the Christian occupation of the Levant and marked the beginning of the end of the Crusades. During the late 13th century, tensions grew between the Knights Templar and the French king, Philip IV. King Philip was deeply indebted to the Templars, having borrowed from them heavily in order to finance his war with England. He also feared that the Templars were too powerful, and that they might establish a monastic state in Languedoc, a region in southern France in which they had a strong presence. Philip secretly plotted to disband the Knights Templar and appropriate their enormous wealth. In 1305, an ousted Templar knight accused his former order of criminal activity. Although most believed that the accusations were false, Philip took advantage of them and pressured the Pope to investigate them. At that time, the Catholic Church was headed by Pope Clement V, a French pontiff who, by many accounts, was a weak pope, who allowed himself to be manipulated by the powerful French monarch. On the dawn of Friday, October 13, 1307, French soldiers rounded up many of the French Templars, including the order's leader, 70-year-old Grand Master Jacques de Molay, and seized the Templar assets in France. The knights were imprisoned and accused of all sorts of bizarre blasphemies, which many of them confessed to under torture. Although most later recanted their confessions, scores of Templars were convicted of heresy and burnt at the stake. Among those condemned to death was Grand Master Jacques de Molay, who was burned alive in a Paris square on March 18, 1314. Before he was executed, de Molay asked that his captors bind his hands as though in prayer and tie him to the stake in such a way that he could face Notre Dame Cathedral. In 1309, following the Templar trials, Pope Clement V absolved the Templar leadership of the charges that had been brought against them. In 1312, after restoring its good name, the Pope dissolved the order and granted its assets not to King Philip, but rather to the Knights Hospitaller. According to legend, some of the Templars had been forewarned of the French conspiracy against them. These men, in the early autumn of 1307, had gathered together a number of important Templar treasures, which had been secreted away in various Templar strongholds in France, and brought them to the port city of La Rochelle. When the Templars were rounded up by French authorities, several Templar galleys laden with treasure left the port and sailed north to Scotland. From there, they followed Old Norse sailing routes to the Americas, determined to hide their most valuable treasures in a dark corner of the map unknown to the vast majority of the Old World at that time. Some believe that they buried their treasures on Oak Island. Wild though the theory may be, there are several tantalizing pieces of evidence which support a potential connection between the Knights Templar and Oak Island. Perhaps the strangest of these is the coconut fiber which lies beneath Smith's Cove, samples of which have been repeatedly carbon dated from 1260 to 1400 AD. Coconut trees are not endemic to the New World, but rather to Southeast Asia and the islands within and the shores that border the Indian Ocean, and are believed to have been introduced to the Americas by Portuguese explorers in the early 1500s. Perhaps outlawed Templar knights, having acquired the material via the Silk Road, brought huge quantities of coconut fiber with them when they fled La Rochelle in 1307. Also consistent with the Templar theory is the small lead cross discovered on Smith's Cove in the summer of 2017, in Season 5, Episode 10 of The Curse of Oak Island. Treasure hunter Rick Lagina remarked that the shape of the artifact strongly resembles that of a graffito carved into the wall of a prison in Dom, France, where members of the Knights Templar were incarcerated following the suppression of their order in 1307. Even more intriguingly, the isotopic signature of the lead of which this artifact is comprised is consistent with lead from a particular medieval mine in Languedoc, France, where the Knights Templar once had a strong presence. Other artifacts hinting at a possible connection between Oak Island and the Knights Templar are Nolan's Cross, an arrangement of boulders on Oak Island which form a perfect Latin cross. The cloisonne discovered on Oak Island's Lot 21, which bears the same isotopic signature as the lead cross, and two mysterious maps introduced to the current Oak Island treasure hunters by Zena Halpern in the summer of 2016. In addition to this hard evidence, there is a wealth of folklore and legend which help support the Knights Templar theory. Some argue that a stone column located at the north door of Chartres Cathedral in the city of Chartres, northern France, is evidence that the Templars were, at least at one time, in possession of the Ark of the Covenant. Chartres Cathedral is considered by some to be one of the world's finest examples of French Gothic architecture. The present-day cathedral was constructed in the late 12th and early 13th centuries. The mysterious column located just outside the cathedral's north door depicts a scene which, some say, shows the Knights Templar secreting the Ark of the Covenant out of Jerusalem on a cart. Some believe the Templars eventually interred the Ark in the Chartres Cathedral. Another argument used by proponents of the theory that the Knights Templar were in possession of the Ark of the Covenant has to do with an embassy of 30 Ethiopian envoys sent to Europe in 1306. Although these envoys were officially dispatched to treat with the Spanish kings of Castile and Aragon, as well as with Pope Clement V, who resided in the city of Avignon, France, many believe that they also might have made the relatively short journey from Avignon to Paris and paid a visit to King Philip IV of France. The leader of Ethiopia at the time of this ambassadorial mission was Emperor Wedum Arad. Arad was a member of the Solomonic dynasty, an Ethiopian royal family whose members claim patrilineal descent from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. According to Ethiopian tradition, King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba had a son, Menelik, who brought the Ark of the Covenant from Jerusalem to Ethiopia about 12,000 years ago. Some believe that Emperor Wedum Arad learned that the true Ark of the Covenant, an artifact which he believed rightfully belonged to Ethiopia, was in the possession of the Knights Templar, and asked the Pope and the kings of Christendom to appropriate it for him, perhaps in exchange for some sort of fee. If true, this would certainly have given the deeply indebted King Philip extra incentive to round up the Templars and seize their assets. Some theorists claim that on October 13, 1307, a small group of Templar knights and men-at-arms who had been forewarned of the French plot against their order fled the port city of La Rochelle with 18 galleys. Some believe that this legend is largely based on the testimony of a Templar knight, Sir Jean de Chalon, which was extracted from him under torture during a 1309 papal inquiry at Poitiers, France. Many historians have doubted the veracity of this legend. The notion that the Knights Templar, following their suppression, found sanctuary in Scotland, however, has several pieces of supposed evidence to back it. If members of the Knights Templar did escape from France by ship, there were only two logical kingdoms in which they might seek refuge: Portugal and Scotland. Both of these kingdoms, at the time of the Templar suppression, had sensitive relationships with the Catholic Church, under whose auspices King Philip had conducted his arrests. Pope Clement V's threat of excommunication for kings who did not arrest their Templars would not have held much sway in these countries. The Portuguese monarchy had endured a rocky relationship with the Church since the days of King Alfonso the Fat, who was excommunicated by Pope Honorius III in 1212. The rift between the Church and Portugal, however, had been mending steadily since the late 1200s. The discord between the Church and Scotland was much fresher by comparison. On February 10, 1306, Robert the Bruce and John Red Comyn, the two guardians of Scotland at the time, guardians being regents who governed the Kingdom of Scotland, met at Greyfriars Kirk, a church in Dumfries, Scotland. The two leaders left their swords at the church's doors and went inside to talk. During their conversation, an argument broke out at the foot of the altar, which culminated in Robert the Bruce slaying Red Comyn with a dagger. When Pope Clement V received word of the incident, Bruce was immediately excommunicated for his sin. 6 weeks after Comyn's death, Bruce was controversially crowned King of Scots. When the lairds of Scotland did not rise up to depose their tarnished king, Pope Clement excommunicated the Scots people as a whole. Some have argued that, because of these excommunications, Templar knights fleeing from France would have found a willing ally in Robert the Bruce and the Scottish people. Another piece of anecdotal evidence placing Templars in Scotland following the French suppression is a legend associated with the 1314 Battle of Bannockburn, one of the most significant Scottish victories in the First Scottish War of Independence. During this historic battle, a small, poorly equipped Scottish army commanded by Robert the Bruce defeated a much larger professional English army commanded by King Edward II. According to some accounts, the English army outnumbered the Scottish army 3-1. Legend has it that a cavalry charge conducted by a small squadron of mysterious, heavily armored knights turned the tide of the battle in Scottish favor. Following this maneuver, the Scottish army forced the English army into a hasty retreat, which quickly degenerated into a panicked rout. Some say that these mysterious knights who turned the tide of the battle were Templars who had fled from France. Even if there is a possibility that members of the Knights Templar fled to Scotland with their most valuable treasures following October 13, 1307, why do some believe they might have shipped these treasures across the Atlantic Ocean to North America? Some believe that the answer to this question can be found in a 15th century Scottish church, known as Roslin Chapel. Roslin Chapel was commissioned in the mid-1400s by Scottish nobleman William of the Highland Orcadian clan Sinclair. Its architecture is considered by some to be among the finest in Scotland. The interior of the chapel is lined with hundreds of intricate stone carvings, depicting both Christian and pagan motifs. Some of the chapel's more mysterious stone carvings have been cited as evidence that the Templar refugees who came to Scotland in the early 14th century made the long voyage to the New World and returned to tell the tale. One of the many carvings inside Roslin Chapel appears to depict two men riding a single horse. The Knights Templar adopted this very image as their seal in order to honor their humble origins. According to Templar lore, two of the order's 9 founders, Hugues de Payan and Godfrey de Saint-Omer, were so poor that they had to share a mount. Another image the Knights Templar were known to have used as their seal at one time is the Agnus Dei, the Lamb of God. This too is another of the stone carvings that can be found inside Roslin Chapel. Some say that these carvings suggest a connection between the Scottish chapel and the Knights Templar. Other stone carvings inside Roslin Chapel are even more mysterious. One of them appears to depict stylized ears of maize or Indian corn. Corn is endemic to the Americas and would not have been known in Europe except perhaps by the Vikings during the mid-1400s at the time of the chapel's construction. Another plant unique to North America which makes a lithic appearance inside Roslyn Chapel is the three-petaled trillium flower. Some believe that the existence of these carvings in a church constructed decades before Christopher Columbus's first voyage suggests that the designers of Roslyn Chapel were privy to unique knowledge of the New World. Some people believe these carvings are evidence that the Knights Templars sailed to the Americas and later returned to Scotland, where they informed members of the clan Sinclair of their findings. Whether or not the carvings inside Roslyn Chapel are proof that the Templars sailed across the Atlantic and back is up for debate. However, an enigmatic letter sent in 1546 from French regent Mary of Guise, the mother of Mary Queen of Scots and the grandmother of James I of England, to William Sinclair, son of the William Sinclair who built Roslyn Chapel, suggests that Roslyn Chapel may be, at the very least, connected with a secret of one kind or another. A line from this letter reads, "We bind us and oblige us to the said Sir William, and shall be a loyal and true mistress to him. His counsel and his secret shown to us, we shall keep secret." If the outlawed Knights Templar really did take their treasure to Oak Island, how did they manage to bury and booby-trap it so effectively? Evidence indicates that the money pit shaft is well over 100 feet deep. Moreover, many suspect the money pit is booby-trapped with an elaborate series of flood tunnels which extend to the beach lines. Constructing such an impressive system with hand tools and medieval technology would take a tremendous amount of manpower and extraordinary engineering ingenuity. Were the Templars capable of accomplishing such a feat? History shows that the Templars were proficient builders. All throughout the frontiers of Palestine, they built stone-fortified garrisons called commanderies, which were complete with chapels, armories, and barracks. In the city of Accra, they built a massive castle and maintained two ancient stone towers called the Tower of Flies and the Accursed Tower. The Templars were also skilled at building subterranean structures. In 1994, a secret underground Templar tunnel extending from the Templar castle to the port was discovered beneath the old city of Accra. Some people, including Kathleen McGowan and Alan Butler, two writers and researchers who present their theories on the Curse of Oak Island's Season 2, Episode 7, The Trail of the Templars, believe the Knights Templar also received help from Scottish Tyrannensian monks. The Scottish Tyrannensians were master craftsmen who built the Scottish abbeys of Selkirk, Arbroath, and Kilwinning. They also constructed the famous Roslyn Chapel in Roslyn, Scotland, as well as the underground tunnel which connects the chapel with the nearby Roslyn Castle. Some believe a number of these monks accompanied the outlawed Knights Templar to Oak Island, where they helped them construct the money pit and its booby traps. Some have suggested that the Templar treasure was brought to the New World not by the Templars themselves, but rather by a Scottish-Norwegian nobleman named Henry Sinclair, the grandfather of the William Sinclair who built Roslyn Chapel. Using supposed evidence gleaned from a book published in 1558 by a Venetian named Niccolo Zeno, some argue that Sinclair, under the alias Prince Zichmini, sailed to what is now Nova Scotia or New Scotland in 1398 with the help of two brothers, Italian navigators Niccolo, the author's ancestor and namesake, and Antonio Zeno. Many historians have criticized this theory, challenging the authenticity of Niccolo Zeno's story. Others have shown that members of the clan Sinclair were among those who had testified against the Scottish Templars in 1309. Stating that if the Templars were good and innocent, they would not have lost the Holy Land, and that the Sinclair family would not likely be friendly towards the Templars. However, the fact that Henry Sinclair was the Earl of Orkney, an archipelago north of Scotland which has strong ties to the Norwegian Vikings, gives credence to the notion that he might have had some knowledge of the existence of the New World. It is a fact that 10th century Viking explorer Leif Erikson founded a colony on Vinland, present-day Newfoundland, more than 500 years before Christopher Columbus's first voyage. Perhaps one of the most striking clues supposedly connecting the Knights Templar with Oak Island is an observation made by Oak Island researcher Mark Finnan. Finnan, in his 1990 book, The Sinclair Saga, claims that the flag of the Mi'kmaq Nation, a Canadian First Nation indigenous to the Maritime Provinces, is a mirror image of one of the many battle standards used by the Knights Templar. There are at least two potential problems with Finnan's theory. The first is that the most prominent vexillum belli or battle standard used by the Knights Templar was the Beauseant, a half-black, half-white banner sometimes adorned with a red cross. If Finnan's Templar battle flag was truly a military flag used by the Knights Templar, it was a relatively obscure one. However, to Finnan's credit, the Templar battle flag he espouses incorporates a number of known Templar symbols. The red cross on a white field, a symbol reflecting the Crusaders' call to martyrdom, adorned the surcoats and mantles of the Templar Knights, and the symbol of the sun and moon, curiously evocative of the Islamic star and crescent, is known to have been used in at least one 13th century Templar seal. The second potential problem with Finnan's theory is that the design of the Mi'kmaq Grand Council flag, also known as the Sante Mewiomi flag, is widely attributed to the influence of the French Jesuits, who converted many Mi'kmaq to Roman Catholicism in the 1600s. Some Oak Island researchers have drawn parallels between the Mi'kmaq deity Glooscap and Scottish Orcadian nobleman Henry Sinclair, whom some believe brought the Templar treasure to Oak Island in the late 1300s. The supposed similarities between these two individuals seems to imply that the legendary Glooscap may be based on the real-life Henry Sinclair, who, according to this theory, apparently interacted with and thoroughly impressed the Nova Scotian Mi'kmaq during his alleged 14th century voyage to the New World. Despite the evidence that supports it, the Templar theory will remain little more than far-flung conjecture until the Oak Island treasure is finally located and liberated from the money pit. Whether or not members of the Knights Templar even knew about the existence of the New World, much less visited it, is a matter of historical debate. Controversy notwithstanding, when one considers the uncanny mishaps that have plagued Oak Island treasure hunters for decades, and the bizarre electromagnetic anomalies that characterize the Money Pit area and the Oak Island swamp, it is easy to imagine that, somewhere beneath the rocky till of that mysterious island in the North Atlantic, ancient religious artifacts of incalculable value lie waiting to be discovered.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to support this channel, please check out the Oak Island Encyclopedia by clicking the link in the description.
Sed nomini